December 1944. Two crossroads near the Our River in Belgium lie silent under heavy gray clouds. Snow blankets the frozen ground, masking the deep ruts left by military trucks. This intersection seems insignificant, just lines on a map, but it controls the entire rear access to the Third Army. An American captain stands in the bitter cold, staring at his tactical maps. He faces a brutal, impossible math problem. Intelligence says a German assault is imminent. The probability estimate sits at 60% for one intersection, 40% for the other. He does not have enough men to defend both positions strongly. Stiting his forces means both lines will break. Concentrating in the wrong place means the enemy pours into the open rear. A single choice will decide who lives and who dies. General George S. Patton will judge that choice by its consequences, not its percentages. This is the story of what a captain did when he had to choose which crossroads to defend. Knowing the wrong choice opens the line. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We tell the World War II stories that show the decision no training could prepare him for. Captain David Whitehawk was 28 years old, an Arapaho from the plains of Riverton, Wyoming, commanding a company in the Third Army. He grew up learning to read the quiet shifts of the wind and the subtle dips of the land before he ever held a military manual. He enlisted after his younger brother died at Pearl Harbor, carrying a quiet grief that hardened into steady, unblinking discipline through the long slog across France. He had seen his men cut down in the hedgerows, and he knew the exact weight of a body wrapped in a canvas poncho. Now, the burden of survival rested entirely on his shoulders as he stared at the map coordinates under the dim light of a field lantern. The math of the intelligence report felt like a trap, and he knew that guessing wrong would mean burying more boys from Wyoming and Pennsylvania in the frozen Belgian mud. The antagonist in this dense forest was not a single visible commander, but the cold tyranny of mathematical probability. It was a sterile 60-40 statistical split generated by staff officers sitting miles behind the front lines in warm, well-lit chateaus. These numbers arrived on clean white paper, typed by clerks who wore polished boots and pristine uniforms, men who had never dug a foxhole in frozen earth. The percentage estimate demanded a conventional choice, treating the lives of 180 infantrymen as chips in a high-stakes poker game. This calculation argued that the higher percentage was the only logical bet, ignoring the physical reality of the ridges and lowlands. It was an unearned certainty born of paperwork, a rigid military logic that lacked the understanding of mud, blood, and tactical consequence. Whitehawk knew that following this percentage blindly would lead his company straight into a slaughter. By December 1944, the Allied advance across Europe had slowed to a grueling, frozen crawl. The rapid dash that followed the breakout from Normandy was gone, replaced by severe shortages of fuel, ammunition, and fresh boots. The Ardennes region was a dense maze of snow-packed forests, steep ridges, and narrow mountain passes. Allied high command believed the German army was entirely broken, incapable of launching any major offensive operations. Because of this widespread institutional complacency, many senior American officers regularly dismissed minor frontline anomalies, chalking up reports of distant engine noises to routine night patrols. Supply lines were stretched dangerously thin, and defensive positions were held weakly by exhausted units spread across impossibly wide sectors. In this chaotic environment, a single breakthrough along the line could compromise the entire flank of the Third Army. The small villages and logging paths near the Our River were suddenly thrust into critical strategic importance. The lack of reliable communication meant local commanders were often left completely isolated, forced to make life or death choices based on incomplete data and vague radio dispatches. The high-level planners' maps simply did not reflect the reality of the freezing mud on the ground. Other battalion commanders in nearby sectors had already let similar intelligence reports slide, relying strictly on standard operational percentages rather than inspecting the physical terrain itself. This environment of severe exhaustion and statistical guesswork set the stage for a critical tactical dilemma. The margin for error was non-existent. A single exposed gap would allow German armored columns to slice directly into the undefended rear areas, cutting off supply depots and field hospitals. The entire weight of the local defense now narrowed down to the specific physical layout of two small clearings in the Belgian forest. The staff intelligence officer arrived at the company command post with a bundle of freshly mimeographed papers. He dropped them onto the wooden table where Captain Whitehawk sat. The lieutenant looked impatient, his clean uniform contrasting with the mud-stained walls of the temporary bunker. He pointed a finger directly at the map coordinates for Crossroads. The orders are clear, Captain," the lieutenant said. Whitehawk looked up from the maps, his face unreadable. "I have read the dispatch," Whitehawk replied. "Then you know the numbers," the lieutenant said. "Intelligence places the probability at 60% for an attack at the hilltop. You need to concentrate your entire company right there. It is standard doctrine to meet the primary threat with maximum force." Whitehawk looked back down at the blue lines tracing the valley below. "The hill can be held with 30 men, wire, and mines," Whitehawk said. "The valley at Crossroads B is wide open. If they hit the valley and we are not there in strength, they run straight into the division's hospital tents within 2 hours." "That is a 40% chance, Captain," the lieutenant answered, his voice rising slightly. "You do not build a defensive strategy around the lower probability. You are gambling with the line. Higher command relies on these estimates for a reason." Whitehawk stood up slowly, leaning his hands on the rough wood of the table. "The intelligence section calculates what might happen on paper," Whitehawk said. "I have to look at what happens if the paper is wrong. If we miscalculate at the hilltop, the terrain still fights for us. If we miscalculate in the valley, the line collapses completely. I am putting the main body of the company at Crossroads B." The lieutenant shook his head, his face hardening with bureaucratic indignation. "This is a direct violation of standard tactical planning," the lieutenant said. "You are ignoring a verified intelligence directive because of personal intuition. West Point does not teach officers to throw away percentages for a hunch. You are risking an entire sector on a minority statistic. The cost of being wrong in the valley is too high." Whitehawk said quietly, "I will report this formal deviation to battalion headquarters immediately," the lieutenant said, snatching his leather folder from the table. "They will not allow a company commander to compromise the rear area on a gamble." Whitehawk did not look up as the officer stormed out into the snow. Within 40 minutes, the formal report detailing the captain's tactical divergence was typed, signed, and forwarded up the chain of command. Reaching General Patton's desk before the evening lamps were lit, Patton arrived within the hour. His command jeep skidded to a halt in the packing snow outside the frozen battalion dugout, the heavy tires throwing up a spray of white slush. 4 polished silver stars caught the dim winter light on his helmet, and the distinct ivory grips of his revolvers rested against his hips. The air in the cramped bunker turned completely still as his boots clicked across the floor planks, every officer instantly snapping to attention. Patton studied the tactical map spread across the wooden table, his eyes tracing the red grease pencil marks. He did not look at the intelligence officer. "Is this the report detailing a deliberate refusal to concentrate at the hilltop?" Patton asked. The intelligence lieutenant stepped forward, adjusting his pristine belt. "Yes, General." The captain refused the 60% probability sector. Patton turned his gaze to Whitehawk, who stood steady against the timber wall. "Captain, did you receive the specific statistical data from the staff section?" "I did, General," Whitehawk said. "And you willfully placed the main body of your infantry in the lower probability valley?" Patton asked. "I did, General," Whitehawk answered. Patton looked back at the map, his thumb resting lightly on his belt. "The intelligence section operates on calculated likelihoods, Captain. They balance the percentages so we can strike with concentration. You threw the numbers out the window. Tell me why you decided the 40% option was your primary defensive line. The hill can be held with a skeleton crew because the slope forces the enemy into a bottleneck," Whitehawk said. "The valley has no natural obstacles. If the intelligence report is wrong about the hilltop, 30 men can still delay them for hours. If the report is wrong about the valley and we are not there, the Germans drive straight through our weak spot and cut the entire division supply line." Patton stood in absolute silence for a long moment, the low hum of distant artillery vibrating through the floorboards. He looked at the intelligence lieutenant, then back at the mud-splashed Native American captain. "The staff believes war is a game of ledger books," Patton said. "They think a higher number is an absolute shield. But the enemy does not read our ledger books." An Arapaho captain put his main force at the less likely objective because the terrain made the less likely objective more dangerous if left undefended. He did not follow the probability. He followed the consequence. He asked where being wrong costs the most, and he defended that specific spot. That is not gambling. That is military judgment. Intelligence tells us what might happen, but the commander on the ground decides what actually matters. Patton looked at the lieutenant, his voice dropping an octave. "Pack your papers, Lieutenant." The captain stays where he is. The armored vehicles of the German vanguard struck Crossroads B just before midnight, their heavy treads churning the muddy snow into a dark slush. They expected an empty gap, but they slammed directly into a wall of American steel. Whitehawk's main force was dug into the frozen earth, waiting. The valley erupted with the sharp, rhythmic crack of M1 Garand rifles and the heavy thud of 50 caliber machine guns cutting through the dark woods. Mortar rounds tore through the trees, shattering branches and showering the advancing infantry with jagged splinters. At Crossroads A, the small detachment held their ground firmly on the steep hillside. The German scouts who tried to probe the elevation found themselves tangled in thick concertina wire, while trip flares illuminated the slope, exposing them to precise rifle fire from above. The high terrain allowed a handful of soldiers to stall the enemy advance completely, validating the captain's geographic calculations. Witnesses from the adjacent field hospital could hear the roar of the battle echoing through the mountain passes. The defensive line hummed with the intense heat of continuous firing, the smell of burnt gunpowder mixing with the freezing fog. By dawn, the shattered remnants of the German assault column retreated back across the Our River, leaving the vital rear area completely secure. Captain David Whitehawk returned to Wyoming after the war concluded, bringing the quiet rhythm of the plains back into his daily life. He settled down in his hometown of Riverton, working the land and teaching his children how to read the landscape just as his elders had taught him. He lived a long, peaceful life surrounded by the mountains, rarely speaking about the freezing mud of Belgium or the tactical choice that saved an entire division flank. He passed away quietly in 1984, leaving behind a legacy of unspoken judgment. The staff intelligence lieutenant, who had demanded rigid adherence to the paperwork estimates, remained in the military bureaucracy for several years. He transitioned to a quiet desk job in Washington, spending his career managing supply records and technical manuals far away from the active front lines. He retired to Virginia in 1962, remaining bitter about the incident and firmly believing until his final days that mathematical probability was the only true metric of modern warfare. General Patton never included the specific details of the Crossroads dispute in his official public communiques, keeping the incident filed away in his private operational notes. He did, however, scribe a short passage in a personal letter to his wife later that same winter. He wrote that a true commander must always look past the clean percentages on a map to see the heavy cost of the wreckage left behind if those percentages fail. Some historians have argued that Captain Whitehawk risked the entire integrity of the sector by intentionally disregarding a formal intelligence estimate, suggesting that a strict adherence to standardized percentages is the only way to maintain unified command coordination during a large-scale crisis. They contend that local deviations create dangerous blind spots for neighboring units. Others have argued the exact opposite, defending the decision as a masterful application of tactical flexibility, proving that a rigid reliance on administrative data can never substitute for a commander's direct evaluation of physical terrain. What is certain is that the tactical defense held the line firmly, keeping the Third Army's vital supply route entirely secure during the critical opening hours of the enemy offensive. If you had been in Patton's position, would you have done the same? Or would you have court-martialed the captain for failing to follow the intelligence estimate? Let us know in the comments, and if you want more stories about the decision no training could prepare him for. Make sure to subscribe.